go ahead and get started. So, some participants here. So for those of you on Instagram, you're not going to see my slides, but I am going to send these slides out later on, just like I do every week, and then you can kind of follow up with them and you can kind of watch the video back again, or I'll just put them as a free download in our link tree, and you can have a look at them through there as well. Kind of makes sense of some of the extra information that I'm talking about. So as I said, thanks for joining me. Today we're going to go over some of the other kind of topics that have been suggested to me over the past 5 weeks. Yes, it has been 5 weeks since we have been in quarantine, which is a bit of a nightmare, but we'll make it work, I guess. So as always, the workshop objective for today is to understand some of the more challenging nutritional habits and kind of hurdles for people to overcome, and then just try and have some actionable changes that maybe we can make with the new information or just the same information that you're getting, and have some concrete takeaways from the things that we talk about today. So this week's topics are: number 1, post-workout nutrition. It's just disordered here. Post-workout nutrition, what that should look like, how it can look, and what it's there for. Cheat meals, why would we do those? Who are they for? Why would you want to do one? And kind of what are the pitfalls and bonuses of each one? And then elimination diets. So elimination diets are probably something that you've heard of. What are they? Are they worth doing? Why would you do them? And again, just some of the pros and cons, the pitfalls, and the good bits about them. So we'll jump straight in today. We'll go straight into some post-workout nutrition. So somebody asked me, like, what's the best post-workout meal or shake option to have? And ultimately, there is no one best option to have. But there is some kind of checkpoints that we want to go through, some checks and balances to say that if we're going to have something post-workout, we want it to look like X, Y, and Z from like a macronutrient and a nutrition kind of profile. And there's certain reasons why we would want to do that. So not saying that everybody has to have a protein shake, or everybody has to have a Quest bar, or everybody has to eat a whole meal, right? It's what the shape of those things kind of look like, regardless of it's what the intent of those things look like, regardless of what shape it takes, be it a shake or a full meal or anything like that. So generally, post-workout nutrition has 3 specific purposes. Number 1, replace glycogen. That's energy, carbohydrates, stuff that you can use very quickly to go and do stuff with. Decrease protein breakdown, so to spare muscle mass. You've just spent a good time kind of picking things up, putting things down if you're post-workout, and you want to avoid kind of breaking down that muscle mass for energy. And then to increase protein synthesis, so that's basically repair, right? So it's to replenish our energy stores, maintain the muscle mass that we've got, and then keep building new muscle mass as we kind of add stuff on top of it. So they're the 3 main kind of specific purposes as to why we would have something post-workout nutrition based. So in other words, we want to look after our energy. I scared the crap out of me then, not with my watch. Whew, you just seen me absolutely crap myself on video. So in other words, we want to replenish stores, increase muscle size or muscle quality, and then make sure that we repair any damage that we've caused during our training. So the main benefits of a good post-workout nutrition are to improve recovery, which ultimately, if you can improve your recovery, it's going to allow you to store the gains that you've just, kind of made, and it's going to allow you to go back and train more frequently. It's going to decrease muscle soreness, which again is going to allow you to recover quicker and go and train more frequently and kind of start this whole cycle over again, which is to stress, adapt, recover, stress, adapt, or stress, recover, adapt, stress, recover, adapt. Okay. And the more frequently we can do that cycle, the better ultimately we'll get at stuff. The better we'll look, the better we'll feel, the better we'll perform. And it's going to increase our ability to build muscle mass, as well as improved loads of other things like improved muscle function, improved bone mass, improved immune function, and really it's going to improve the muscle that you've got. It's going to improve that efficiency and kind of ability to be able to burn fat as an energy source, which is ultimately the end goal, right? For a vast majority of us, is to build lean muscle mass, burn extraneous body fat, look better, feel better, perform better, be a little bit lighter, be a little bit more capable, be a little bit more confident, all those things, all right? So when we go through our post-workout nutrition, then like that's the purpose of why we would have something probably within about 2 hours of training. Okay. I said the other week on one of our previous ones, it was like 30 minutes to 90 minutes. That's great. Like whilst your body is requiring more glycogen, more things to help it repair, like give it what it wants pretty quickly. Like we call it the anabolic window, or it's known as is the kind of window of opportunity in nutrition science or training in nutrition science. Like within about 30 minutes to 2 hours, get something in that's going to allow you to kind of force your recovery a little bit. Okay, so post-workout nutrition requires two things mainly. Number one, protein to aid protein synthesis. So build muscle and make sure that you don't use it as energy, and carbohydrates to replace your muscle glycogen so that make sure that you do use that as energy. All right. It's also going to enhance the role of insulin being transported around the body, and insulin is the things that's going to move those nutrients around the body as well. Okay, so whole food meals aren't always super practical. So you might not be hungry immediately afterwards. So like sitting down and eating a ton of food might not be something that you want to do. So we talked about that a little bit last week. Janet asked me a question like, I'm not hungry right after training. What should I do? This is kind of perfect, and it tags on to the end of that question. So big meals might not be ideal for you. Whole food also digests a little bit slower, right? The more solid the mass, the harder it's going to be for your body to kind of break it down. And ultimately, we want nutrients pretty quickly, so we don't want to have to spend a ton of time kind of breaking food down and digesting it a lot. So ultimately then consuming a liquid form of nutrition that contains rapidly digesting carbohydrates. So the scientific portion behind that is maltodextrin, dextrose, and glucose. Basically, that's a Gatorade. That's why you might have that. And then protein. Protein doesn't really matter what it is, but whey protein is typically a good option. Things that you can break down quite easily. That'll accelerate the recovery by utilizing insulin, so it'll allow kind of better nutrient support around the rest of the body. Okay, it's also likely that liquid is probably tolerated a little bit better post-training. So you've probably heard before, chocolate milk is a great, no, this is not an excuse, but chocolate milk is a great option post-workout because it has a 4-to-1 carbohydrates to protein ratio. And that's pretty good. So don't be afraid of getting carbohydrates in post-workout, even though you've just used mostly carbohydrates to kind of power your workout, hopefully. Don't be afraid to get more back in, because not only are you replenishing that the carbohydrates, which is necessary, but it's essential that you replenish that, because if you don't replenish it, your body will take energy from somewhere else, and the easiest next thing for it to break down outside of carbohydrates is protein, and that's muscle mass. Right? So you don't want to kind of limit the amount of carbohydrates that you're taking in, because your body's going to go and get it from somewhere else. It's just going to keep evolving. So you want to give it the things that it wants ultimately, and that's carbohydrates, right? So making sure that you get a good blend of carbohydrates and protein in post-workout. You can bring your own shaker and mix it with water, milk, or whatever it might be. You know, it's not they're not the best things in the world, because in order to make them shelf stable, they've probably had some other bits and bobs added into them. But like Core Power protein shake is fine. But again, just trying to make sure that you're getting enough protein. Probably like 20 grams of protein is a good amount, and enough carbohydrates. Something around, let's say 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrates is a pretty good amount as well. All right. So, and it's essential that, as I said, you get a blend of both of those in there, because if you just get one more so than the other, they kind of work really well together. It's not that if you just eat protein post-workout, you know, you'll lose everything. You'll get something, but it's better when it's coupled. It's going to do a better job when it's coupled with carbohydrates. Okay. So that's number one. Hopefully that kind of sheds a little bit of extra light onto post-workout nutrition. It's not essential that you have a shake. You can have a meal. If you feel like it's going to satiate you a little bit more, you can have a meal. But if it's not ideal for you to sit down and have a meal at 7:30 in the morning or 8 in the morning as you're trying to rush to work, a protein shake is a great option. Trying to get that 4-to-1 blend of carbohydrates and protein after a training session is a good choice there. All right. So moving on. The next thing that we're going to talk about is cheat meals. So cheat meals or treat days, whatever you want to call them, all kind of a concept that you've likely heard before. And they play a big part in people dieting in general. And today we'll just kind of explore some of the pitfalls of them a little bit, why people would use them, the pros and cons of people who are of reasons to why you would use them, and then the pros and cons of maybe the reasons you wouldn't use them, and how they can kind of be a little bit more nefarious and deleterious towards your kind of long-term goals. Okay, so what are cheat meals? Cheat meals are scheduled meals that include indulgent foods that you wouldn't ordinarily permit yourself on a diet. So a cheat day or cheat meal or treat meal, however many times you do it, is when you allow yourself obviously to consume foods that you probably wouldn't consume for the rest of the day or the rest of the week or any other time outside of your dietary kind of, let's say your dietary restraint, whatever diet you're doing at the time. Okay, just as we discussed in week 3, the longer you stay away from a food, particularly carbohydrates, so if you've ever not eaten carbohydrates for a long period of time, the more seductive it becomes when we reintroduce it into our diets. So whether that's for a short period of time or full time. If, say, for example, we do go on, let's say we go on a keto diet, right, which is no carbohydrates, and you intend on doing that for a short period of time, by where you eliminate carbohydrates so that you can reduce your total calories so that you can lose weight over a 10-week period. And then your intention is to just lose 10 pounds, let's say 10 pounds, and 10 pounds down, however long it takes for you to get there, you just intend on going back and eating carbohydrates. The likelihood is that if you stay away from that particular food for a long period of time, it's going to become incredibly seductive and you're going to be far more likely to overeat it when it is reintroduced. So we as human beings do really well with rules and restriction in general. Like, you know, I've talked about it before, but we do very well with habits. We do very well with restraints and kind of order and calendars and that kind of stuff. We are very ordered animals, as the case may be. So I have all these white lines on the floor behind me. So we do very well with rules. So when we kind of implement a few extra rules, it kind of gives us a box to live in and we don't feel like we're overburdened with choice. And that's fantastic. But knowing, as I said, going forward, if and when we reintroduce foods, it becomes highly seductive and we're far more likely to overeat it, that obviously can be a bit of a drawback. So why would you have a cheat meal? So some people can get away with, I say it's a strategy, not necessarily get away, but some people can use a cheat meal and it can be very useful for them. So part of the reasons why you would use a cheat meal is, let's say, for example, you're creating a 500 calorie deficit every day for a week. Okay. Now, and on one day, you intend on giving yourself a little bit more food that's maybe off that diet where you're going to overconsume some more calories later on. So let's say it's chips or it's ice cream, it's pizza, something like that. Something that isn't typical on a normal kind of restrictive diet. If you can maintain a caloric deficit most of those days, so I did a little bit of math here, so if you're with me on Zoom, you can see this. If you're not, I'll share it with you later on. But if we consume on most days, we make a calorie deficit, of 400 calories, and that's over 20 meals. Let's say we eat 21 meals a week. That's 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, right? So for 20 meals, and we train 4 or 5 times a week. Each day we're making a 400 calorie deficit. And on that 7th day, we decide I'm going to give myself a treat meal or a cheat meal, whatever you want to call it. And we eat maybe 500 to 1,000 calories worth of chips or ice cream on a Friday night, whatever that time is. I'm still netting myself an 1,800 calorie there or thereabouts over the total week. I'm still netting myself a caloric deficit. So I'm still working towards my goals. So if you can maintain that, kind of level of restraint from that 6 days previous to you having your cheat meal, fantastic. The drawbacks, however, come when we eat that cheat meal and we're eating incredibly seductive, highly palatable food, and we say we're only going to eat 1,000 extra calories of this thing, but we're eating something that is very seductive to us. So the likelihood of us being able to stop at the end of an extra 1,000 calories is quite low. And the likelihood of us not repeating it the day after because it's such a delicious and tasty food and not wanting to go back to it again is, again, quite low. Okay. So if you feel like you've got that level of order and restraint and control where previous 6 days, you can create a caloric deficit and you can balance it out by just giving yourself a little bit of a treat on a Friday night, and you've built that level of caloric flexibility in through the week and you can tolerate it, fantastic. But don't go diving into saying, I'm going to have myself a cheat meal on a Friday without any kind of prior knowledge of like, hey, how might this affect me long term? If it's the first time you're ever like, you're super restrictive Monday through Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday comes along and you blow the doors off it and you overeat, not only will you not maintain a calorie deficit, you probably won't even level out and go into maintenance. You're likely to overconsume because of the types of food being hyper palatable and super tasty, and because we've shown restriction to them before. And most of you that are listening to this have probably already felt that feeling in the past. You've eaten some stuff, so you've not eaten something for a long time, and then when it's first put in front of you, you go apeshit and just, you go apeshit and just confuse and just consume and consume and consume. Before you know it, you're in a coma afterwards, and you've eaten 3,000 calories extra than what you intended on doing because it was just really hard for you to keep the lid on it. Okay, so that's maybe some of the ways that it's not super useful to have a cheat meal. If you can tolerate it, understand that weight loss will still happen. It will just be a lot slower over time because you're not necessarily doing this extreme level of like restriction or restraint. So it can be very useful, but just know both sides of the coin are viable, right? And that cheat meals might not be a good option, or they might be a great option for you. Okay. If, however, you have a strict weight loss goal, you don't have to have a cheat meal. Let's say, for example, you've got an 8-week weight loss goal and you're trying to diet for 8 weeks, but you want to have a cheat meal every day. Oh, sorry, you want to have a cheat meal every week. Just do a 7-week diet. There's no reason to continuously knock yourself off, because every time you understand that every time you have a cheat meal, you take on those risks of being able to overconsume each time. That's 7 opportunities for you to overconsume and kind of damage the caloric deficit you've made the previous 6 days. It might not be useful for you to use a cheat meal in that scenario, especially if your goal is a pretty short-term goal, like you're trying to make weight for a competition, or you've got a race coming up and you know that the lighter you are, the better your performance is going to be. It really just might not be that useful for you to do that, okay? So I wrote earlier on, so sporadically consuming highly processed foods on a template of more whole foods is likely to give you some physical side effects as well. So let's say, for example, you're really good with your meat and vegetables and the food that we typically deem as healthy, the ones that allow us to be able to stay satiated, support our nutrition needs, support our health needs, support our performance goals. And we stick with those for like 6 days a week. And then on Friday, we go apeshit and we consume a load of Ben and Jerry's. You better believe that on Saturday morning, you're going to feel like hell because your stomach's just not going to be used to it, right? Your digestive system is most likely not going to be used to it because you're creating some level of consistency of things that don't have highly palatable foods and processed sugars in them and that kind of stuff. And then if you just dump it all in your system on one day, you're going to feel like you've got a little bit of a food hangover. There's a likelihood that most of us has felt that as well. So just knowing that, again, the knock-on effect is kind of, as I said, just like a hangover. You feel great when you're doing it. You're out partying, drinking, eating ice cream, and then the day after you feel like absolute hell and you swear off alcohol for the rest of your life until next Friday comes along. Again, that can begin to gradually just break us down. And it won't necessarily allow for a long-term approach towards food. So ultimately, as I said, some people do better with stricter rules and boundaries around tasks, whether it's food or anything else. But the things that I would say is, instead of trying to remove or completely restrict certain foods on a day-to-day basis, a way to look at it is potentially just to reduce your interaction with those foods if your goal is very specific, or to try and show some restraint around it. So portioning things out are very useful. So let's say, for example, you go and buy a carton of ice cream and it's a gallon carton, and you know that you intend on only having 500 calories worth. Try your very best to buy a pint or buy something that is only 500 calories so that you have a mechanism by which you can show some control and show some restraint, and you don't have to rely entirely on willpower that way, okay? But show some, and then when it comes to, the reduction aspect is trying to put yourself in environments that are, where those foods that you know are hyperpalatable for you are less, I guess, kind of less prevalent. So let's say, for example, you've got nobody's going out to a party anytime soon, but bear with me here. You've got a party on a Wednesday night and you intended on having your kind of cheat meal on a Friday night. You've kind of got two options there. You can either go to the party, or you've got three options. Go to the party and try and really hold your tongue and make sure that you don't eat it. You can not go to the party, or you can move your cheat meal from Friday night to Wednesday night and kind of lower the barrier to entry there a little bit, which might be an option. But know that, again, you can just balance those options out as you go through everything. Okay, so just trying to show a little bit more of a reduction of your exposure to a particular food, or just some restraint around things, versus completely removing something or completely restricting your access to it. Because the more we restrict, the more likely we are to rebound, because ultimately the foods that we're craving are weaved into the fabric of our everyday life. You can't walk down the street without seeing an advert for something delicious. So understanding how to control your responses to those things versus completely trying to cut yourself off from it is probably a better use of your time, would be my advice. All right. So that is cheat meals. If you have more questions about cheat meals, happy to talk to you further about it. You can shoot me something in the DMs or whatever it might be. All right. So the last little bit of work we're going to go to here, and hopefully I'll try and get to a bonus question that somebody asked me last night. But the last little bit of work we're going to go to here is elimination diets. Now, elimination diets are another buzzword that are kind of thrown around. So I wanted to try and create a little bit of context around what an elimination diet is, because even diets that aren't deemed to be elimination diets ultimately have some level of elimination in them. So what I mean by that is paleo, right? Paleo says don't eat legumes, which is beans. So it eliminates a food group, even though it's not deemed to be an elimination diet. Keto will eliminate carbohydrates. Even though it's not deemed to be an elimination diet, it does eliminate an entire food group. Elimination diets actually, however, are not our mainstream diets, right? An elimination diet should be used for food intolerances and sensitivities and allergies, right? It's trying to identify those things. That's the purpose of an elimination diet. So try not to get drawn into the idea of removing entire food groups that are vilified as good or bad. If you're in an elimination diet, or you're doing an elimination diet, or you're thinking about doing it, really it's there, as I said, to identify some food intolerances, foods that that maybe don't make you feel great, sensitivities and allergies. Okay, that is the purpose of a elimination diet. So an elimination diet, as I said, is not an opportunity to vilify or label a food group as inherently bad or of causing weight gain, or inherently good as being the magic reason that a weight loss occurs, right? So that's sometimes how lots of things are labeled. Like if you cut out carbs, ta-da, you'll immediately be super lean and shredded. Not the way it works. We talked about that. I think we've probably talked about that every week so far, which is ultimately it is caloric deficit that allows us to lose weight, or caloric surplus that allows us to gain additional weight, right? And however we find that structure, there is nothing magic about it. It is just however we find that the balance between those two things is what will ultimately give us the opportunity to lose weight or gain weight. Okay, many mainstream diets, as I said, limit certain food groups. Just as we discussed in week 3 in our mainstream diet question, limiting certain food groups ultimately limits the amount of calories that you can consume. So if we just cut out carbohydrates, and you're very used to already eating carbohydrates, and now I say to you, sorry guys, no bread, potatoes, pizza, none of that stuff, you have to find a way to get more calories in, and you don't get to use your kind of staple everyday foods to be able to do that. So ultimately you will end up consuming less calories. Ergo, you'll consume less total food, and you'll likely lose a little bit of weight. And then before we know it, we think, well, it's the carbs that do it. Well, it's not the carbs that do it. It's the total reduction in calories that do it, right? So the reasons for following an elimination diet can be things like rashes or skin changes, joint pain, headaches, fatigue, sleeping difficulties, bloating and stomach pain or cramps, even just like the change in poops. Like I had to slip a poop joke in there. But any of those things can be reasons to do an elimination diet. If you get weight loss out of an elimination diet, it's purely, or weight gain, it's purely a byproduct of those things. So if somebody touts an elimination diet to you for any reason other than currently the food you're eating makes you feel like crap versus makes you look like crap, it's probably a bad idea for you to follow down that path, okay? If you currently eat a certain food group, like I mentioned, and you notice you don't feel great shortly after, then paying attention is the first adjustment that you should be making. Radically removing entire food groups from your diet should be reserved for extreme cases and supervised by a doctor, or a dietitian, or an allergist. Yes, that's the name, the allergist. If you're going to radically remove food groups, it's likely not something that you need to do on your own. The doctor's probably told you that that's something that would be a good idea for you to do. So again, radically removing food groups is probably not the best idea, especially if you're so used to already eating that food group. Now cutting it out is going to make you miserable. First things first, it's going to make you miserable. If you've ever tried to not eat bread after only eating bread for however many years, you're going to be miserable. So first things first, just start paying attention to the foods that you're eating. And if after you eat them, you feel a bit icky, or you feel like you need to run to the bathroom more frequently than not, then maybe you don't tolerate that particular food, not the food in general. So if it's oats, it's not carbohydrates in general, it could just be oats. So start limiting your interaction with those foods, and then start replacing them with something else versus just cutting out entire food groups. Okay? So I know I can eat dairy until the cows come home. My business partner, on the other hand, is not great with dairy. I can eat oats until the cows come home. My wife, on the other hand, does not deal well with oats in the slightest. So it's different from person to person. She can tolerate bread like no other. If I eat bread, I feel really bad for a little while afterwards. Both of those are carbohydrates. It's simply just how my body processes those very particular foods versus the entire macronutrient of carbohydrates. All right. So hopefully that makes sense for people. So the last little bit, I've got 3 minutes, so we'll go on to a bonus question. And this is kind of outside nutrition a little bit, but I wanted to make sure that it got answered because I thought it was a really good question. So the bonus question in this 3 minutes is, can you / a muscle get stronger without getting bigger? And hopefully, I see that Tony Gentlecore is on this, and hopefully he's still on this, and that you can just ask him lots of questions on this as well if you really want to. The answer is yes. Yes, it can. A muscle can 100% get stronger without getting larger in cross-section, right? So we'll say a lot, strength is a skill. And what we mean by strength is a skill is that ultimately we're going to try and answer this question a little bit now. The way a muscle can get stronger without it getting bigger is neuromuscular adaptation. Ultimately, it improves the efficiency of that exact same muscle can be improved, like the pre-existing mechanism can be improved within the tissue without creating a bigger cross-section of that particular tissue, all right? So hypertrophy, the size of a muscle, doesn't have to occur in order to make that muscle stronger or to make it more efficient. All right. So the way this happens, and as I said, we routinely say this phrase, which is strength is a skill. You can just do movement if you want, and you can just do stuff, and you'll probably get some results from that. However, if you actively really try and think about contracting musculature and creating more tension, you can make a given muscle structure, a pre-existing mechanism, you can make it stronger by simply trying harder. And that's the best way that I can describe it, by trying harder to make that thing fire in a very particular way. So you can get more out of more than just your initial gains from just doing work. All right. So the way this happens is through increased motor unit recruitment. So let's say, for example, I have a muscle. I'm going to use this remote. This muscle is this big, and in this muscle right now is 100 muscle fibers. But when I just do stuff, I only really fire 50 of those muscle fibers. So by contracting harder or by training in a very particular way, I can just, without the muscle getting any bigger, I can just contract more muscle fibers within that structure in and of itself. If I'm just doing stuff, maybe I only contract 50 of them, but by trying to develop my neuromusculature, that adaptation, I can maybe fire 70 of them, which allows me to produce more force, ergo get stronger without actually having to increase the size of the tissue, all right? So the other option is, let's say, for example, there's still the 100 muscle fibers in this muscle, but this one fires first, then this one fires, then this one, and I need it to fire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and all the way across. I can improve the way that it fires. Again, it doesn't have to get any bigger. I don't need any more muscle fibers. I can just work on improving the way that it fires. Okay, so that's just the coordination of motor unit recruitment. So again, if you've ever trained with us, we'll probably have gone through some level of cueing that's kind of helped you do that. So obviously there's also a technique and a skill acquisition to any training that we do. So the more frequently that you do it, the more likely you are to get a little bit better at just doing that particular act, even though you don't have to necessarily try any harder. So it can feel like you're lifting 135 pounds easier than you once did, and that's simply just a skill acquisition portion of it. Like the more exposure you get to it and the better the coaching is and the better you do that each individual lift, you don't ultimately have to get necessarily any stronger per se, like the muscle doesn't have to get any bigger, but you just get better at doing a given task. So hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of context around that. Obviously there's a lot more of a deeper dive into muscle anatomy and physiology and so on and so on. But yes, it can get stronger without it getting bigger. And I guess this is probably one of my favorite questions to answer, because I think the question that we mostly get as fitness professionals is, especially from women, I don't want to get bulkier. I do want to get stronger, or I do want to get leaner, or I do want to improve my kind of muscular physique the way I look right now, but I don't want to get bigger. Well, getting bigger is one byproduct of strength training. It's not the only byproduct of strength training. The way I usually describe it to people is there's men across the globe who are hammering themselves in the gym 2 hours a day trying to get bigger, and they're failing miserably at it. So just by coming into the gym and picking up a weight a few times doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get balloon up and be Arnold within the weekend. So to quickly go back to that last little bit, which is like lifts that maybe help us generate a little bit more neuromuscular adaptation, are big compound lifts, things like squats, deadlifts, pull-ups and military presses, push-ups, for example, places where you can recruit more musculature, more muscle fibers, within the given musculature, and then be able to produce more force through that very same system without having to make that system bigger or with a greater capacity, okay, or a greater size, you just improve the capacity of the current mechanism. So obviously, as I said, there is a little bit more to it than that, but the answer to the question is, can you improve the strength of a tissue without it getting bigger? 100% you can. Think of strength as a skill in order to be able to do that. Thank you very much for your time, especially the extra 2 minutes that you've got here. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, find a way to message them to me, whether it's through Instagram, whether it's through email or carrier pigeon, whatever you need. Let me know. Thank you very much. I'll see you all same bad time, same bad place next week. Get some questions in. All right, let's stop recording. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Darren.